Beginning of intercollegiate athletics. Intercollegiate athletics are believed to have started in the 1840s, and they were friendly competition among local colleges. Begun as opportunities to socialize and escape the rigors of education, the students would plan to meet, agree on a loose set of rules that often changed during competition, and include a post-competition social event. These contests grew in popularity and began to attract spectators, such as other students, faculty and staff, local alumni, and the general public. They were often rough, but with no malice toward one another and under the auspices of friendly contest. It is widely believed that the first official intercollegiate athletic competition, as approved by the colleges themselves, was a boat race, or regatta, between Harvard and Yale in 1852. The race occurred at Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire, and has been an annual event since 1859, although the location has changed numerous times throughout the years. Growth. As intercollegiate athletic competition grew more popular, local businesses began to take note that they could advertise to a wide variety of people in a short amount of time through college athletics. Booklets were created and sold to the spectators, and these local businessmen began to purchase advertising in them. Newspapers began to print results, and thus the sports section was born. Soon, small athletic budgets were developed, and leagues and conferences were formed. Colleges began to see the economic benefits of successful athletic teams. The oldest conference is the Michigan Intercollegiate Athletic Association, founded in 1888. Popularity grows. As popularity grew, competition began to get more intense due to the public attention and economic benefits, and problems arose as a result. Local athletes and even professional athletes, who are not students of the institutions, were hired to play. Injuries became common, and even some deaths occurred. Gamblers took notice of the popularity of intercollegiate athletics, and they began to buy results. Players were more than willing to be paid to miss some tackles or make a critical mistake here and there. The NCAA: Creation, Growth, and Revenue. In response to the aforementioned issues, the Intercollegiate Athletic Association of the United States, or IAAUS, was formed in 1906 and, in 1910, became what is now known as the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or NCAA. The NCAA attempted to create a common set of rules and policies for its member institutions and develop national tournaments for determining champions. In addition, recruiting guidelines were put in place, and scholarship and financial aid packages were developed. Athletics becomes a revenue source. In the early 1900s, entrance fees began to be charged to college sporting events. Harvard built a $300,000 football stadium to maximize their profits. Football games became the central focus of the social atmosphere of many universities. Radio and television. Revenues continued to grow as colleges understood the financial possibilities. In the 1920s, radio stations began to pay colleges for broadcast rights to their intercollegiate athletic competitions. And by the 1950s, television broadcasting ruled the day, and athletic departments continued to gain more power and more money. NCAA versus Board of Regents of the University of Oklahoma. The NCAA was an organization that regulated college athletics, and membership was voluntary, although NCAA schools were not allowed to play against non-NCAA schools. The 1984 Supreme Court case dealt with television broadcast rights to college football games, which were controlled by the NCAA and which limited the number of appearances a university could make on television in a season. The NCAA believed that their control of television rights protected live attendance. A number of colleges disagreed, however. These larger colleges formed the College Football Association and tried to negotiate television contracts until the NCAA advised the colleges that they would be banned from all NCAA competitions and not just in football. The Board of Regents of the University of Oklahoma and the University of Georgia Athletic Association sued to force the NCAA to stop the practice. The Supreme Court held that the NCAA's actions were a restraint of trade and ruled for the universities. As a direct result of this ruling, more games were televised, which had the initial effect of driving television revenues down. However, this trend reversed dramatically, and by 2005, the University of Notre Dame had signed a contract with NBC to broadcast all home games for a 5-year period. In 2009-10 academic year, the University of Texas at Austin reported profits of almost $69 million just from football alone. Most of this money was earned in television contracts before the University of Texas added its own Longhorn network, which will pay approximately $15 additional million per year. Tournaments, sponsors, and coaches' pay. In addition to the schools bringing in a large amount of revenue from broadcast media, sponsors also lined up to pay millions of dollars to be the official anything of an athletic department, and schools also received additional payments from bowl games and national tournaments. As a result, coaches in the major sports enjoyed tremendous salary growth. For instance, Alabama head football coach Nick Saban now makes over $7 million per year. And they even get paid to have their teams wear certain brands of athletic shoes or other sweetheart endorsement deals that their players are not allowed to enjoy themselves. However, for athletes in revenue-producing sports, namely high-level football and men's basketball, the financial picture is very different. For instance, at the University of Texas, the largest moneymaker in college athletics, the rate of increasing revenue far outpaces the rate of increasing scholarship costs. As you can see on the chart here, the disparity is not only staggering, but also increasing by the year. All the while, the student athlete, who puts forth the effort and has helped create so many additional revenue sources for their university, are either unaware or misinformed about their importance and contributions. They put their bodies on the line and are often forgotten if they do not perform up to expectations, some even losing their scholarships, which are not guaranteed for more than 1 year. Is a scholarship enough to make this a fair trade? Are they students or employees? A student can be defined as an individual who is attending school for educational benefit and toward a degree, whereas an employee is an individual who is hired to work for wages or other compensation. Now we pose the question, isn't a scholarship athlete compensated with a scholarship? In a New York Times article, college athletes decided where to matriculate most often based on the athletic opportunities the school offers, rather than its academic merits. The term student athlete, which is so generously applied by the NCAA, may be accurate for the majority of students who also play in intercollegiate athletics, but it does not seem to apply for those who attend based mainly on non-academic activities and whose purpose is to generate revenue in an entertainment environment, such as high-level football and men's basketball players, as well as other programs. So the big question is, are these individuals students or employees? This question has recently been raised loudly by members of the Northwestern University football team. Their most important argument in their attempt to unionize is that their contribution to the university is outside of the academic realm, which is a fact that labor leaders point us to as a reason to classify them as employees. Arguments against paying student athletes. There are several arguments for why student athletes should not be compensated beyond that of their scholarship, some of which are here on the slide, such as a budgetary impossibility to pay all student athletes equally across the department, the Title IX implications that will arise, and not only that, but the fact that a scholarship is not just a compensation in terms of its present-day dollar value, but also has a growing future value which will appreciate over time for the student athlete. All of these are legitimate concerns, however, they are not insurmountable ones. We'll go a little bit further in depth. The first question it would be wise to ask is, how much money is actually out there? The fact is, the vast majority of college athletic departments make no money. In fact, most of them operate at a loss, with a few revenue-producing sports attempting to make enough so that the athletic department just breaks even. Just 23 of 228 athletic departments at NCAA Division I public schools generated enough money to cover their own expenses in 2012. And of that group, 16 also receive some type of subsidy. And 10 of those 16 athletic departments received more subsidy money in 2012 than they did in 2011. A recent study of Michigan State athletics showed that football and men's basketball are the only sports that actually turn a profit. Even its two other sports that charge a fee lost money. The same is true at the University of Florida. So for the vast majority of college athletes, the argument that anything more than a scholarship is not worth the cost is actually really based in fact. Arguments for paying student athletes. Student athletes are the face of an athletic department and often the university themselves. Most of the time, the most famous face one associates with the university is that of a student athlete. In addition, student athletes are not afforded enough time outside of their practice, game, workout, tutoring, etc. schedules to maintain other regular employment, which is something that regular students are allowed to enjoy. And finally, there is a lot of money made on student athletes' work, likenesses, blood, sweat, and tears, none of which they are allowed to see themselves, which is unique in the contemporary labor market. Another reason to consider paying these student athletes is in regard to the danger that gambling provides. A scholarship basketball player is fortunate to have his education paid for, but that will not allow him to buy a pizza on Saturday night, for instance. It's tempting for a 20-year-old to accept an offer of thousands of dollars to lose one game with a couple of bad passes or a key fumble. The City College of New York in the early 1950s was a basketball powerhouse. However, in 1951, 3 of its star players were arrested for point shaving. Others were implicated, and it was uncovered that at least 7 schools were involved and affected at least 86 games. Other schools that have dealt with gambling scandals to date include Boston College in 1978, right here at Arizona State University in 1994, Northwestern University in 1995, and the University of Toledo in 2007. In addition to the revenue that they create for their schools, as well as the fact that they don't have the time to carry a regular job like a normal student, it should be noted that student athletes are also often some of the most in-need students on a given campus. Specifically, many of the athletes that are producing the most money for their institution and for the NCAA are from the poorest demographic groups, as the chart here illustrates. For larger universities, such as the University of Texas from our earlier example, and while understanding that most programs work under a much tighter budget, it is widely held that those athletes that are participating in a revenue-producing sport should be paid a stipend for the work they put in to help create such a financial stream. Now we'll go a little bit more in depth into some of the cases which can be seen as boiling points in the pay-for-play debate about whether or not student athletes should be compensated monetarily and whether their working conditions are acceptable. We'll start with the CCNY case of 1951, which was alluded to earlier. The CCNY point-shaving scandal of 1950-51 was a point-shaving gambling scandal that involved 7 schools in all, with 4 in Greater New York and 3 in the Midwest. However, most of the key players in the scandal were players of the 1949-1950 CCNY Beavers men's basketball team. The scandal involved the Beavers and at least 6 other schools, including 3 others in the New York City area, NYU, Long Island University, and Manhattan College. It spread out of New York City to Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, the University of Kentucky in Lexington, and the University of Toledo. The scandal would spread to 33 players and involved the world of organized crime. CCNY was eventually banned from playing at Madison Square Garden, although the coach, Nat Holman, would be cleared of any wrongdoing. This would not be the last time that a coach received no punishment despite being compensated monetarily, while his players were the ones that suffered. The case of Ed O'Bannon versus the NCAA is also worth mentioning, and is quite pertinent now. The NCAA sold likenesses of college players to video game producer EA Sports for their college basketball and football video games. Ed O'Bannon, a player on the 1995 UCLA basketball team which won the NCAA National Championship, is leading a class action lawsuit to have some of those profits paid to the college players who are represented in the game. At issue is the idea that the above likenesses, which are oddly familiar and look similar to Ed O'Bannon and Blake Griffin, for an example, are instead referred to as forward number 3 and forward number 23, as a way for EA Sports to avoid paying royalties to the athletes whose likenesses are clearly being used. Trial for the case is set for July 2014. Football players at Grambling State, an HBCU and member of the Southwestern Athletic Conference, made national headlines in October 2013 when they staged a boycott, refusing to play until working conditions were made better for them. At issue, mold in facilities and on uniforms and equipment, as one can see above, unreasonable travel and lodging accommodations for away competition, lack of stability in the program with 3 head coaches over a 12-month span, and university administration's perceived apathy and lack of interest in their plight as students. In an open letter to school administration, the players pointed out the aforementioned reasons for sitting out a game against Jackson State, while also citing that they had to ride a bus 12 hours from Grambling, Louisiana to Indianapolis, Indiana for a game earlier in the year, while university officials flew private. In January 2014, football players from Northwestern University, in conjunction with former University of Massachusetts basketball player Luke Bonner, filed a petition with the National Labor Relations Board to form CAPA, or the College Athlete Players Association. This proposed union has 11 main goals. Number 1, minimize the college athletes' brain trauma risk. 2, raise scholarship amounts. 3, prevent players from being stuck paying sports-related medical expenses. 4, increase graduation rates. 5, protect educational opportunities for student athletes in good standing, such as study abroad and Rhodes Scholarship programs. 6, prohibit university from using a permanent injury suffered during athletics as a reason to reduce or eliminate a scholarship, which they are allowed to do as it is now. 7, establish and enforce uniform safety guidelines in all sports to help prevent serious injuries and avoidable deaths. 8, eliminate restrictions on legitimate employment and the player's ability to directly benefit from commercial opportunities. 9, prohibit the punishment of college athletes that have not committed a violation. 10, guarantee that college athletes are granted an athletic release from their university if they wish to transfer schools. And 11, allow college athletes of all sports the ability to transfer schools one time without punishment, much the way that their coaches, who are paid, are allowed to do. Pictured here is Northwestern quarterback Kane Coulter, one of the chief players in the unionization effort, wearing a wristband with APU inscribed, standing for All Players United, a rallying cry for a widespread movement among college athletes to unionize for better conditions and treatment. Between Northwestern football's attempt to unionize and the Grambling State situation, it's very clear that these student athletes are not just out to make a quick buck. They want acceptable working conditions and to be treated with dignity. Future challenges. Looking into the future, we can only predict continued revenue growth and continued pressure to adjust the student-athlete compensation structure. It seems as though a proverbial Pandora's box has been opened in terms of the NCAA, its regulations, and the feasibility thereof. There is already a growing contingent among the power conferences, being the ACC, Big Ten, Big 12, Pac-12, and SEC, to abandon the NCAA altogether and govern and stage athletic competition amongst themselves under their own rules which are feasible for their budgets, which dwarf those of smaller conference schools. Beyond that, revenue from competition is inequitable as well. For instance, the new college football playoff, beginning in 2014, signed a 12-year media deal worth a reported $7.3 billion. However, approximately $90 million per year will be distributed to each of the aforementioned power conferences, while the smaller 5 conferences will be forced to split merely $17.3 million per year among themselves. The have-have-not dichotomy does not merely exist at the student-athlete level, but also at the institutional level, and this disparity is also reaching a boiling point. In the near future, we may see the NCAA disappear altogether. There are many challenges ahead before the issue of paying college athletes is resolved. Should all athletes be paid? And if so, how much and why? Or should it be only those who are in a sport which produces a positive money flow? And how to determine the amount each player receives? For instance, does the star sophomore quarterback receive much more than a senior reserve linebacker? Should the floodgates open and allow certain sports to be run purely as a minor league business enterprise, recruiting with financial incentives, and thus render the pursuit of academics strictly up to the individual? As long as the NCAA continues to hide behind the curtain of amateurism for all collegiate sports, the troubles of the past will continue into tomorrow.